The day I said no, the knock on my apartment door came at 7:47 on a Tuesday evening. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my laptop screen, refreshing my bank account balance for the third time that hour. The promotion had gone through. 6 figures. My hands were still shaking from the email I'd received that morning. But when I opened the door, the congratulations I'd been waiting for my entire life never came. My mother stood there first, lips stretched into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Too bright, too polished, like she'd practiced it in the car mirror on the way over. Behind her, my father shifted his weight from foot to foot, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. Surprise! My mother sang, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She held a grocery store cake, the kind with the plastic flowers that taste like wax. We heard about your big news. My stomach dropped. How did you? Your cousin mentioned it on Facebook, she said, setting the cake on my kitchen counter with a decisive thud. You really should call your mother when something this important happens, sweetheart. My father closed the door behind them. The click of the lock felt like a trap snapping shut. Congratulations, he said, but the word came out flat, rehearsed. He wasn't looking at me. He was scanning my apartment, taking inventory of everything I'd worked so hard to afford. The new couch, the framed prints on the walls, the coffee table I'd saved 3 months to buy. Thanks, I managed. My voice sounded small in my own home. My mother pulled out a chair and sat down like she owned the place. So, she said, folding her hands on the table, how much are you giving us? The world tilted sideways. Not how are you feeling? Not we're so proud of you. Not even a pretense of caring about anything other than the number in my bank account. Excuse me? I whispered. My father finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. Don't play dumb, sweetheart. You got a big raise. Your mother and I have been struggling. It's only fair you help out your family. Fair. The word hung in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't put out. I stood there, frozen, as memories crashed over me in waves. Memories I'd spent years trying to bury. I was 7 years old the first time my parents disappeared for a weekend. They left me at my grandparents' house on a Friday evening, promising they'd be back Sunday morning. They didn't come back for 2 weeks. My grandmother found me crying in the guest bedroom on day 10. She sat on the edge of the bed, stroking my hair, and told me something I didn't understand at the time. Some people aren't meant to be parents, little one, but that doesn't mean you're not meant to be loved. My grandfather was the one who taught me to tie my shoes, who helped me with my homework, who showed up at my school plays when my parents couldn't be bothered. He worked double shifts at the factory so I'd have new clothes for the school year, so there'd be food on the table, so I wouldn't feel the weight of my parents' absence quite so heavily. And my parents? They were at the casinos. I didn't learn that part until I was 15 when the collection calls started. Men with rough voices asking for payments on loans I didn't know existed. My mother would hand me the phone with tears in her eyes, begging me to explain to the angry voice on the other end that we'd pay soon. We just needed more time. But time wasn't what they needed. Money was. By the time I was 17, I was working 3 jobs, waitressing after school, babysitting on weekends, and doing data entry from home until 2 a.m. Every penny went to paying off their debts. Credit cards maxed out on slot machines. Personal loans taken from loan sharks with interest rates that doubled every month. Rent they'd gambled away instead of paying. I watched my grandparents' savings disappear, funneled into the black hole of my parents' addiction. My grandmother sold her engagement ring. My grandfather took on a 3rd shift despite his bad knees. And when I got my scholarship to college, when I finally had a chance to escape, my mother cried and told me I was abandoning them in their time of need. I gave them half of my scholarship money that first semester. I told myself it was the last time. It wasn't. Now, standing in my own apartment, staring at the same 2 people who'd drained every resource I'd ever had, I felt something snap inside my chest. How much did you need? My mother asked again, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We were thinking maybe 40% of your monthly salary, just until we get back on our feet. 40% of the salary I'd earned by working 80-hour weeks. by missing sleep and skipping meals and saying no to every social invitation so I could prove myself indispensable at work. My father leaned back in the chair, confident. It's the least you can do. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done? The words came out sharper than I intended. My mother's smile wavered. We raised you, didn't we? Fed you, clothed you. Grandma and Grandpa did that, I said quietly. You dumped me at their house every chance you got. My father's jaw tightened. Watch your tone. You gambled away their savings, I continued, my voice growing stronger. You racked up debts and made me pay them off when I was still in high school. You took half my scholarship money and blew it at the blackjack tables within a month. My mother's face flushed red. That's not fair. We had a problem, yes, but we've changed. Have you? I walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a stack of papers I'd been keeping for months. Bank statements, overdue notices, all addressed to them, all forwarded to my address because they'd listed me as a contact on everything. I dropped them on the table in front of them. My father glanced at the papers, then looked away. My mother didn't even try to read them. 3 weeks ago, I said, you took out another loan, $10,000 at 39% interest. The payment address is my apartment. Silence. 2 months ago, you opened a credit card in my name. You maxed it out in 6 days. My mother's eyes went wide. We were going to pay that back. With what money? I demanded. You don't work. You haven't worked in over a decade. You live off Social Security and whatever you can guilt out of relatives and whatever you can steal from me. My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Don't you dare talk to your mother like that. Then don't treat me like an ATM. My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it, for still caring enough to be hurt by this. My mother reached across the table, her fingers grasping for my hand. I pulled away. Sweetheart, she said, and her voice had that pleading quality I'd heard 1,000 times before. We're family. Family helps each other. Family doesn't abandon their child for weeks at a time, I said. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't show up demanding money the same day their daughter gets promoted and then act like she owes them congratulations. My father's face darkened. You ungrateful little... I paid off over $60,000 of your debts before I turned 21, I said, my voice shaking but steady. I gave you half my scholarship. I covered your rent for 2 years while I was in college, living off ramen and working night shifts just to make ends meet. I've been paying for your mistakes my entire life. My mother's lip trembled. The tears started, right on cue. How can you be so cruel? How can you be so selfish? I shot back. The apartment fell silent except for my mother's theatrical sobs. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was the moment. The one I'd been rehearsing in my head for years but never had the courage to actually face. I want you to leave, I said quietly. My father laughed. Actually laughed. You don't mean that. I absolutely mean that. My mother looked up, mascara running down her cheeks. Baby, please. The people who raised me were kind, generous, and loving, I said. They never asked me for a single cent. They gave everything they had to make sure I was safe and fed and happy. They're the ones who showed up at my graduations, who called to check on me, who actually cared whether I was okay. My father's hands curled into fists. Those were your grandparents' jobs? No, those were your jobs, I said, and you failed. You chose poker chips and slot machines over your own daughter. You chose yourselves over me, every single time. So don't stand in my home now and act like I owe you anything. My mother stood up, her voice rising to a shriek. We're your parents. You're strangers who share my DNA, I said. That's all you've ever been. The cake sat untouched on the counter, its plastic flowers looking sadder by the second. My father moved toward me, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to intimidate me physically. But I didn't flinch. I'd spent too many years being afraid of disappointing them, of not being enough, of failing to measure up to some imaginary standard they'd never actually set, because they'd never cared enough to have standards at all. Get out, I said again. My mother grabbed her purse, her face twisted with rage. You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back and we won't be there. Good, I said simply. My father pointed a shaking finger at me. Don't think you can just cut us off. We'll find a way. If you harass me, I'll file a restraining order, I said calmly. If you open another account in my name, I'll press charges for identity theft. If you contact my workplace, I'll sue for harassment. Are we clear? They stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Maybe I had. Maybe this was who I'd always been underneath the guilt and the fear and the desperate need for their approval. Maybe I just finally let her out. My father grabbed the cake off the counter and headed for the door. My mother followed, pausing in the doorway to deliver one final blow. Your grandparents would be ashamed of you, she spat. And that's when I smiled. Really smiled for the first time all evening. No, I said softly. They'd be proud. The door slammed shut behind them. The sound echoed through my apartment, and then silence. Real silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind that comes with dread and anticipation. Not the anxious kind that makes you check your phone every 5 minutes waiting for the next demand. Just peace. I walked to my window and looked out at the Pittsburgh skyline. The city lights twinkled like scattered diamonds, indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere out there, people were living their lives, making their choices, carrying their own burdens. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying theirs anymore. My phone buzzed. A text from my grandmother's old number, the one my aunt had now. Your grandma would have loved to see this day. The promotion, yes, but more importantly, you standing up for yourself. She always said you were stronger than you knew. Love you, kiddo. I pressed the phone to my chest and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from my parents' number. I blocked it without listening to a single voicemail. I changed my locks. I called my bank and put additional security on my accounts. I contacted a lawyer about the credit card fraud, and then I did something I'd never done before. I took a personal day off work, drove to the cemetery where my grandparents were buried, and sat between their headstones with a thermos of coffee. I did it, I told them, my voice barely above a whisper. I finally said no. The wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere a bird sang. It felt like an answer. That evening, I came home to find an envelope slipped under my door. My mother's handwriting, shaky and desperate. Inside was a letter full of apologies that rang hollow, excuses that didn't matter anymore, and a final plea for money disguised as medical expenses. I didn't even finish reading it. I tore it in half and dropped it in the recycling bin. 3 weeks later, I got a call from my aunt. My parents had shown up at her house, asking for money. She'd turned them away. They'd tried my uncle next. He'd done the same. One by one, the family members they'd exploited over the years were closing their doors. I'm sorry you had to deal with them for so long, my aunt said. We all knew, but we didn't know how bad it was. You were just a kid. I'm not anymore, I said. And it was true. Somewhere between opening that door and closing it in their faces, I'd stopped being the scared little girl who thought love meant sacrifice, who thought family meant endless giving without receiving, who thought she had to earn the right to exist by paying for someone else's mistakes. That Saturday, I went to the animal shelter and adopted a cat, a scrappy orange tabby with one torn ear and an attitude problem. The volunteer said nobody wanted him because he was too independent, too set in his ways. I took him home immediately. I named him Charlie after my grandfather. That night, I sat on my couch with Charlie purring in my lap, my new promotion letter framed on the wall, and a future that finally felt like it belonged to me. Blood doesn't make a family, I realized. Love does. Respect does. Showing up does. And I'd finally chosen the family that truly cared. The family that had always been there. The family that never once asked me to be anything other than myself. My phone buzzed one last time. Another blocked number. Another desperate attempt to reel me back in. I silenced it, scratched Charlie behind his torn ear, and smiled. I was done paying for someone else's choices. I was done being afraid. I was done. And for the first time in 32 years, I was finally, beautifully, completely free. Thank you, my loves, for watching until the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the newest videos.